Is the UK government hiding excess deaths? Last week, the Office for National Statistics confirmed that 10,169 people had died in England and Wales during week 30 of 2024. The ONS reported this as 816 fewer deaths than expected, thus giving the appearance that excess deaths are no longer a problem and that mortality levels are lower than expected. However, 10,169 deaths in the week is actually 337 more deaths than the 5-year average of 9,832. How can deaths be above average and yet reported as being lower than expected? The answer is that in February 2024, the Office for National Statistics, under orders from the UK government, changed the way excess deaths were to be calculated. The traditional 5-year average method was replaced with a new expected death model. While the 5-year average method was based on actual deaths recorded in the preceding 5 years, which had served so well during the pandemic where excess deaths were welcomed as it enabled the government to implement tougher restrictions, this became a problem, however, after the pandemic was over and death rates continued to be in excess. The ONS then devised this new expected death model, which inflated the baseline by over 10%, and hey presto, all of the excess disappeared. If we compare the week 30 2024 mortality data with the same week in 2020, we see that there was only 8,891 deaths in the corresponding week of 2020. 1,278 fewer deaths in 2020 than in 2024. Now remember, this was in the middle of a deadly pandemic when we had no vaccines and the country was being opened back up following lockdown. Comparing 2024 with 2021 is also interesting. We had 10,169 deaths last week, reported as being 816 deaths fewer than expected, yet in the corresponding week 30 of 2021, there were 10,135 deaths registered, which was reported as being 1,083 more deaths than expected, over 10% excess. So we had more deaths in 2024, yet somehow the ONS are now reporting that as being lower than expected, where in previous years it would be reported as excess deaths. 2022 throws up yet another anomaly. This time 11,013 deaths were reported in week 30, which equated to 1,678 excess deaths, 18% above average. This was in the middle of summer, after the COVID pandemic had effectively been stood down and over 125 million COVID vaccines had been administered in England and Wales. Why were excess deaths so high in the summer of 2020, after a 2-year period of extended excess mortality, where we had suffered almost 200,000 extra deaths amongst our most vulnerable? 2023 saw a return to baseline, with 9,684 deaths reported in week 30, which was 14 more than the 5-year average. Unfortunately, however, into 2024, we are once again seeing excess deaths in mid-summer, with the week 30 total up to 10,169, which I previously stated as 337 excess deaths above the 5-year average, an average that includes the pandemic years of 2021 and 2022, where mortality rates were elevated. Looking at week 30 across the last 5 years, we see surprisingly that in 2020 we had the lowest number of deaths in week where mortality levels were below average. And then we have seen excess deaths in 21, 22, 23 and now 24. The high levels of excess death created a problem for the UK government, as death rates continued to be elevated, and despite 165 million doses of COVID vaccines being given, the ONS were still reporting thousands of deaths involving COVID, 95% of which were now amongst the vaccinated. So the ONS removed the old 5-year average method of calculating the excess deaths and instead replaced it with this new model, which inflated the baseline by over 10%, and with it removed all of the excess deaths in 2024. How do you solve the problem of excess deaths? Easy. You just raise the baseline. Here is a quick video from the ONS, Julie Stanborough, explaining how they cook the books to disappear the excess. Thanks for watching, guys.
During and since the coronavirus pandemic, we've generally seen more people die than we'd expect. We call these deaths above average excess deaths. Different organisations have used different ways to calculate this, each with merit and particular uses, for example for planning health interventions and identifying emerging threats. In the spirit of continuous improvement, we've been working with independent experts and those across government and the devolved nations to develop a common UK-wide approach. Using our new approach, today's release estimates 11,000 excess deaths in 2023. While this is lower than our previous estimate, our new method accounts for the growth and ageing of the population. These are key factors in understanding how many deaths we'd expect to see and whether the number of deaths is below or above this estimate. It's important to note that our estimates of excess deaths are just that, estimates. They can't be counted individually, unlike death registrations, which haven't changed.